Welcome to another edition of the Eye on Life podcast. I am your host, Brian Boyer. Like us, share us. What else can we do? Is there anything else? There's share, there's like, there's follow, all of the above, right? We want everyone to follow us. We have Don Napoleon back with us for part 2. And we had a really interesting conversation last week, and I want to get into a couple things before we get into the main conversation. Don, first off, Don, everything well? You're doing well? I'm glad you came back for part 2.
Yep, healthy, feeling better, and just taking it day by day.
It's always, and I say this, you're familiar with dad jokes.
Of course.
And the whole point of dad jokes is not just the how, they're kind of lame and they're a little they're cheesy, but it's the repetitiveness of them. Like, it's the kind of thing that, you make the joke, the same joke over and over again. So right. I'm not going to make the joke that, I'm glad you came back this week. I guess I didn't scare you away, because I've made that joke too many times, but of course I had to get it in there.
Yeah. Well, my daughter goes, "Dad, you say this all the time." And I go, "Oh, gee, sorry."
I say, if you have a good joke and it's your go-to, you go do it as many times as you can. It doesn't matter. If you have something you like, you go for it as many times as you can. But in all seriousness, thanks for coming back for part 2. I know you're a busy man, so I appreciate you coming back. We had a great conversation the first time. I want to thank Must NY, who www.mustny.com, COVID masks. I think I mentioned in the last show. So my dad had it. He just came out of quarantine, so he's feeling better. Now my mom has it.
Oh,
of course. So now she's quarantining. So it's what we kind of assumed that she'd be getting it. But the point is, wear the masks, do something for your loved ones, and just get a mask. Contribute to mustny.com. They have a great business. Chris and Monica Bossett out in Western New York near Buffalo. They're doing a great job. Mm-hmm. Entrepreneurs trying to make it. And they're beautiful. They don't just, as I said, they don't just, protect you and protect others, but they're very comfortable. They can be fashionable. In fact, I have an Eye on Life one. I should have brought it with me. I'll bring it on the next show. I'll put it on and wear it. Yeah. A great Eye on Life podcast show. I also want a special shout out today to some new listeners. Indianapolis. I've never been to Indianapolis. I think I've flown through the airport there once. So thank you to our new listeners in Indianapolis. And I may have mentioned this one before, but Augusta, Maine is another one. I was actually talking to someone recently, and do you like lobster?
I'll eat it.
Lobster.
I'll eat it.
But you'll eat it. But is it something like, would you say, I have a craving for lobster, I need to go down to the Maryland shore? Okay.
Not at all. Yeah.
So I was told that so Augusta, Maine, we have some listeners up there, and I would love to know if this is true. I'm told that the best lobsters are in Maine, which makes sense. But
where's Martha's Vineyard?
That's considered Massachusetts, I believe.
Okay, because my buddy just got back with his wife, and he said the best lobsters are there, hands down.
Well, the Martha's Vineyard, they're elite lobsters in Martha's.
Yeah. That's what I told him.
and lobster's an interesting thing, because I like the taste of lobster. I've had it before. It's fine, but I don't know that I've ever ordered it. And honestly, there are things in life where people, they hype a movie or a song or a restaurant or a hotel, and it gets hyped up so much that there's nothing that restaurant or anything can do to be as good as everyone says that it is, because it's just so overhyped. I feel like that's with lobster. Everybody I know loves lobster, and it's good, but with the way people talk about lobster, you think it's like this delicacy, that's the most amazing thing in the world. And even when people order it, like if you go out with like a group of people and somebody orders lobster, I feel like there's a tone in their voice. Like, it's a special thing that they're ordering lobster. It's good, but I feel like the way people talk about it, it's too, the expectation for lobster is too high.
Right. I don't get it.
This is what I think about during the week.
Yeah. It is a thing. It's just like, are you getting lobsters? Are you getting lobsters? I mean, it's just like steak eaters, but it's like for lobster is like the thing.
Right. And steak, I feel like steak is more common. I'd much rather have a nice steak than a lobster.
Yeah.
I like the taste of steak better. It's easier to eat. I don't like how you have to crack the lobster. You should not have to work that hard.
Right.
And if you're going to have to work that hard to eat something, it better taste better than lobster. I'm sorry. Lobster's good, but it's not worth the effort. I'm very passionate about this.
It's funny. Speaking of seafood, you just brought a taste back into my mouth, and you were saying that you've never been to Indiana. I actually covered the Super Bowl in Indiana then, and I flew in late, and we need to get something to eat. They're like, hey, you want to get some great shrimp and seafood? Go to this restaurant. So I go there, and then the restaurant's like literally about to close. It's kind of bar, and everyone's looking at me when I come in, and I'm like, I want to order the shrimp. The whole bar is like staring at me. I'm like, why is the whole bar staring at me, right? And he was like, he ordered the shrimp. He ordered the shrimp. And I was just like, he ordered the shrimp. And the lady was like, you want the special sauce too? I was like, yeah. So I was like, okay, what's the catch? What's going on? I dipped the shrimp into the special sauce. I swear to God, it seemed like 8 fires were inside my mouth. And the whole bar is like, oh. And they're just like, you know, can he take it? Can he take it? Can he take it? So after I finished burning the hell out of my throat, and like the Super Bowl crowd's going crazy, they were just like, yeah, you know, sucker just walked in. We just want to see if he can take it. And I was just like, this is hilarious. So every time somebody says Indiana, I think of that hot ass sauce and that shrimp downtown during Super Bowl.
Well, and I think Indianapolis is more. I think it's more of like a steak. It's more of a meat town, isn't it? More of a steak town. So they're probably wondering why. And then they figured if you're going to have the shrimp, let's at least give them this hot sauce.
The kitchen was closed, so they were like, "This is what we have left." But they didn't say anything about that extra hot sauce, the special sauce, whatever it was.
Well, they wanted to see your reaction to it, of course. And I will say that that's very daring of you, because I sort of feel like when it comes to seafood, I'm not getting seafood in the Midwest.
Right.
The Midwest is too far from water, you know, to order seafood. If I'm getting seafood, it'll be in Florida or on the Northeast, New England, or on the West Coast. I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it in Illinois. It's not close enough to the ocean. But anyway, that's a good story. So our conversation last week was great, and it really got me thinking about a lot of things during the course of the week. And I want to revisit a couple of things, and I want to continue on the conversation. Don Napoleon and I, we talked about kind of race in society today. Don, as a black man raising a family, and some of the experiences that you've had that are specific to you. You gave us some great thoughts and ideas that were based on your experiences. So you're not speaking for other people, you're speaking for yourself. And one comment that I got from someone, which was a very positive comment about you. Of course, the positive comments come to the guests, not to me.
Right.
They probably want you to be the host now, that's the only problem about having guests that are really great, because I'm always worried that now they're going to want you as the host. But somebody remarked that you made really great points. Mm-hmm. But you said it in a way that was almost kind of chill, kind of almost laid back. Which and I've always known you. I've never seen you get mad. I'm sure you have, but you've always seemed to kind of be a chill guy. When you speak, I listen, but you're not necessarily screaming. You know, you're stating it in a stern, maybe firm way.
Right.
But the person that listened to the podcast was saying that you brought up some really interesting points, but they were. I don't want to say surprised, but they were impressed, I guess, by the way you were just kind of expressing it. So I guess my question to start today for you, and you know, in society, and this doesn't even have to do with race. This is anybody, that it seems that the people that get the most attention are the ones who are the loud ones, the ones who are not bashful, the ones who are screaming from the rooftops about whatever they're screaming about, right? Mm-hmm. Could be about issues. It could be about personal things, whatever. When it comes to some of the challenges that you've faced as an African-American, can we raise these points and convey these points without screaming, without yelling? And I don't even necessarily mean literally, you know, but or does it have to be something where you have the bullhorn and you're literally screaming from the rooftops? Or do you feel like we can make headway in this country? And let's talk about your experiences. Yeah. Without raising our voices, because there are a lot of loud people. There are a lot of there are protests, and there are a lot of very loud people.
Right.
And I'm wondering, I thought this was a really interesting point, that somebody thought that you were conveying it so strongly with a very even voice.
Yeah.
At what point do we keep the even voice, and at what point do we have to get up and yell?
No, great question. I mean, this has several different factors and answers to it. And it could be. And I'll give it from my perspective and people's experience as well. So people's experience, how old, their age, their travels of their life can determine how they deal with any racial or incidents that have occurred to them, right? It could be geographical. It could be experience, it could be life, it could be age, it could be so many different things. Okay, now from my perspective, for me, I'm fortunate enough that, you know, I grew up in the New Jersey, New York area. I grew up in a diverse environment. I have experienced a lot of different racial incidents and things that took place. But God brought me through different challenges where, and before I say all this, if my wife is here, she'll say, "Who, Don, the Gemini?" Like, you know, he goes from 0 to 100, right? Okay, depending on what issues are being discussed. I'm a totally different person at home discussing around friends and family. But to answer the question, so you know, I went to Catholic school all my life, so I had a different upbringing, but I was a kid. I was still a kid, right? But I had a different understanding of how you treat people and how you convey information to people. One of the things that really helped me is when I was out of college and my first job, a gentleman that played for the Green Bay Packers was a Buddhist at this firm I worked at. And he was like, "Have you ever been interested in it? You know, just a way of life, a business way." I was like, "No, I have a religion. I'm okay." He's like, "No, just a way of life." So he brought me into this holistic way of Buddhism and enlightenment through life and business, and not switching your religion. And this was years ago when I was just getting started. And it really helped me to just be at ease and to help me to be able to talk and convey and to be kind of more of a different person. Not saying that I don't get angry. I do get angry. So I say all that to say those experiences help me to have these conversations and to be able to speak these conversations in a different and eloquent way. Now, depending on what's going on in somebody's life, something really traumatic could happen. Something very, you know, something really bad could happen where, you know, whatever you've had in your experience to kind of help me become could go out the window. So the other part of the answer is we live in a country that has policies and has laws, plain and simple, right? Are they always followed all the time? Maybe, maybe not, right? You know, it just depends on where we are. The point I'm getting to is what I've learned 47 years of my life is we have freedom of speech, and you can protest. It gets attention. You do it peacefully, it gets attention. Some people are just really, really aggravated because things that have happened in history are just continuously repeated themselves, especially for minorities, and not looking at them saying, "Oh, they just don't occur." They're continuously occurring, like people being killed. I mean, recently, a kid from my college was hung in New York City in 2020, right? And the story was being investigated. They weren't sure if he did it to himself or if it happened, or so it's like a very, very weird story. And then it came up again in North Carolina. So I say all that to say that when you want change and when you want your voice to be heard, you, not you personally, or if you can assist, you put yourself in a position to be like, okay, will I be a judge? Will I be a prosecutor? Will I be a lawyer? Will I be a politician? Will I be a legislator? To really help facilitate change. That's the only way it'll happen, in small increments over time. So, you know, some people choose to do protests and other people choose a different way. I've seen that at my age where I am now, if I could strategically help to move people into a position to help make laws better, then that's the way that you make change.
So it's really more, it's the action versus the loudness of the voice. I mean, anybody can scream whatever they want. Maybe they get heard, but it sounds like what you're saying is it's really the action, whether it's loud or whether it's subtle. It's really, that's the only thing, the proactivity that's going to actually make things happen.
Yeah, and I say this because I've been on both sides. As a video journalist, I've covered marches, I've covered protests for a lot of different organizations. I've been in the thick, in the middle of them, right? And then I watch them from the beginning and to the end, and the things that take place and how they go on. And I've watched the people that really make a difference, where it's like, let me get a seat at the table and sit with a politician or sit with someone that can assist with helping to make change. Not saying if you yell or if you march or you protest, is you're making an awareness of it, but then what's the next step, right? So then that's the effect to help to make some type of a change. I hope I answered the question.
I want to ask you about protests.
Yeah.
because when it comes to protesting, there's a lot of it's a lot of volatility, a lot of passion and spark and all that when it comes to protesting. And on both sides, you have the protesters, you have anti-protesters, and a lot of times protesting causes discomfort because it can tie up traffic.
Right.
There can be, there's public safety resources that need to be brought in. Sometimes people get hurt, even if it's not violent. There's masses of people, somebody could get hurt. Do you think that protesting is it an effective means of having your voice, not, again, when I say your voice, a voice heard? And I guess because and I know you mentioned this in the last show too, you videotaped many of these, and I guess the second part of that question, are protests useful? Do they help? And also, is it the kind of protest? Because a lot of times you'll see on TV the violence of the protests and the businesses being burned and the police cars being burned. And we're going to get to media, and I want to talk to you about media too. But what's an effective means of protesting? Is protesting at all? Is it effective? Do you think that it's something that is a platform for that can be used when done effectively and safely and all that?
Yeah. Well, we live in a country that we do have the amendment and freedom of speech to be able to do that, right? The unfortunate part is that we live in a country that we can do that, but then it comes with other things with it. The meaning of protest has always been to protest peacefully. When one of the main protests and marches happened with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama, and they march across the bridge, it was done peacefully. It's like, hey, we need to be heard. Things are happening in our community to our people that we really would like to be heard, and no one's listening, right? So then protests are meant to be to show some form of discomfort. Originally, protests started as a peaceful means to be heard, and then, of course, politicians and people that wanted to listen say, okay, let's they're protesting. This has to be an issue, and I don't want to continue to have unrest. Let's help fix the problem. If it's in the means and if it's in the interest of politicians and lawmakers for that to happen. Originally, it was supposed to be peaceful, and protests and marches have gotten different, right? Depending on where you are, depending on the situation that occurs. I mean, if you live and let me give an example. If for some people that live in a city where continuously people are being killed and continuously people are being mistreated, by the time protests and marches come, people might just be angry. And usually the old folk in areas want peaceful protests, but then it merges with the young kids and it merges with different people that have different emotions and energy that's going on, and sometimes it gets different, right? The other part to that is, to answer the question, yes, it can be done peacefully. Yes, it is a means of communication and also an amendment for it to occur. I don't agree with when it does get violent, but you can't control people. Most of the time, the outcry is for it to be peaceful. But lately, and I don't have factual information with this, but protests have been hijacked, marches have been hijacked, and they've caught certain people where it starts peaceful. Like I was watching a march and a protest once, and it's peaceful, and all of a sudden they look and they just see like a whole group of other people breaking windows, and the people would leave the march and the protest and walk over and go, "Hey, dude, like, we're not here for that." And then they would notice they weren't even from the city, they weren't even from the area. So that's a whole nother conversation of hijacking protests, and then you have people that's not even with the main cause that they're trying to fight for.
There those from and what I've read, and again, facts. Facts mean different things to different people, and when I say that, because I don't know necessarily what is fact and what's not fact anymore. Even if you read articles in the paper or you listen to what a candidate has to say, doesn't mean that it's true. Right. You really, and it's so funny too, because I used to always be like, okay, if somebody says something on TV, I won't necessarily take them at face value. I might go and I might research that issue a little bit more. But even when you do that, you still don't know if you're reading. Yeah. Everything can be manipulated. But what I have read though, and what I've seen and heard, is that there are people that are actually anti those protesters. And so to your point, they hijack them. They send people in to destroy things and to make the people that are actually protesting for good look bad and look violent.
Right.
And I think that builds and enables a certain stereotype as well.
Yeah. Right.
And I want to ask you about that too, because I think that there's a lot when it comes to minorities. But we live in a society now. It's not even just minorities. I mean, people stereotype everything now. I mean, there's so many stereotypes, and stereotypes can be very dangerous.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, and people stereotype the protesters. They're all violent. They don't really even know what they're protesting. They're looting stores and they're committing crimes. And that's not necessarily. There is a pocket of people that are doing that, but to the point is there are also people that are protesting and have their voice heard. It's a constitutional right to do that. In the experiences that you've had, and we talked about this on the last show about some of the professional experiences that you've had where somebody was looking for Don and they walked right by you because they weren't expecting a black person, right?
Yeah.
Is there a certain stereotype about black people that particularly bothers you? We know we talked about being offended or not being offended. What stereotypes are out there that we should really try to be put into rest here? I know there's a ton, but one or two.
Yeah, it's really like it's weird. It's two-part to that question. Like I will receive like, oh, I didn't know you were black, because of the way you carry yourself or the way you speak or the way you sound or the information that I read about you. I didn't know. So that stereotype is kind of like, so then basically what you're saying is you had me in the category, but you're saying, oh, then that's not what was perceived. And that's judgmental, right? And the main stereotype is, thug, rap, hip hop, non-educated, and, just all these things that fall into this category of that's what you could be. I'm gonna tell you something really crazy. The first school that I got a scholarship at was in West Virginia to play football. And we hung with everyone on campus. And you're coming out of school, I drove 10 hours away to be down there. We're hanging with everyone, right? So we hang with these girls one night and we talk. So one of these girls are like, she was Caucasian. She says to me and my buddy that came from school together, she goes, I've never been this close to a black guy. Right? Then she goes into, do you mind if I touch your hair? Do you mind if I touch your skin? This is not going towards a bad avenue. And then she goes, you know what's crazy? Like, we would watch MTV or BET, MTV Raps or Yo Raps or at BET, and the things that we saw on television, we thought that's what black people were. So over the years, like the hanging pants and all these things, they just made a perception. So then later on in life, I'm going to fast forward, this one young lady that I'm always in conversations with people, she goes, I came to Washington, D.C., and I've never seen that many sophisticated African Americans before in my life. She's coming from like Midwest Indiana, where it probably is not even the norm. I don't know. I haven't really been there in other parts of the Midwest. But she was just making a comparison. She was like, there are so many intelligent, sophisticated African Americans in that metropolitan area. I was like, oh my God, like blew her mind right now. And it's okay to have this conversation. And I don't look at her as being naive or not naive. It's just part of educating where you travel, where you go, and the people you talk to. Fortunately for me, I never had one track of my people or Caucasians, Indians, Latinos, Asians. I've never had that track, but it's always been portrayed to us in that way of being a thug or whatever, or crime or everything else. Yeah.
Right. And that's really interesting because, like the way those girls reacted to you, I don't necessarily even have a problem with that because they just didn't know. I mean, there are some people that are just hateful.
Yeah.
And they won't give anybody that's different from they won't even give that person a chance just based on how they look.
Yeah.
But it sounded like they actually were, it's a little weird that you wanted to like touch your hair and stuff, but still it sounded like she was almost trying to educate herself. Both of them were. And then it's sad that she, the one had to come to DC to see what she said is quote unquote sophisticated black people, because that wasn't what she was used to. but that's my other question.
Yeah.
Geography, right?
Mhm.
Can we expect somebody to really understand people that are different from them if they've never been around people that are different from they are? So, like for example, I told you I grew up in upstate New York, so it was a very large. I went to a very large high school. There was some diversity, but it wasn't huge. Most of the people did look like me, and I never had any sort of part of this was the reason what I was raised, but when I say issue, I never really thought about whether somebody is I don't, again I said in the last show I do see color, but not in the sense that I'm not talking to that person. If somebody, I don't care what they look like, I'm talking to them. And to be honest with you, somebody can be a complete jerk whether they're white, black, Asian. I mean, somebody's a jerk, they're a jerk. I don't want to hang out with that
Sure,
person.
yeah.
I don't really care what they look like.
Mhm.
If they're a jerk, they're a jerk. I don't want to hang out with them. But what kind of role does geography play? I mean, if you grow up, let's say you grow up as a white person in the DC area versus a white person in the Midwest, maybe where you don't have a lot of diversity around you. How much role does that play in how, I guess, tolerant you are, how naive you are, maybe,
Yeah.
and it may not even be your own fault.
I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think the disadvantage that you do to yourself is not to travel. You should travel.
Right.
Everybody should travel. And then if you do live on the West Coast, the Midwest, or the East Coast, or North or South, and you're accustomed to certain people or things and how they are, then you should travel. And then when you travel, because most of the time people that you talk to that travel are more worldly and not as naive. So geographically, to answer your question, it does center your mind to think in one particular way. It really does. I can't tell you how many parts of the country that I've been to, different places like South Carolina or the Midwest, or different places, and and you would see people. You would see, sometimes I see African Americans and sometimes other races staring at me like, listen to how he's speaking. Like, he's speaking so eloquently and correct. They would say correct. And it's like, where are you from? And I'm like, New York, New Jersey. But they're so used to seeing people in their town that either got a type of a dialect, look a certain way, and probably, just dress differently. They're not used to it. And if they've been there all their lives, and then you grab them, snag them, and drop them into the metropolitan area, like, the hell, where am I? The Twilight Zone? Where did these people come from? And it's the same thing for all nationalities and races too. Like, you could say Latinos are a particular way, and then all of a sudden, like, you go to a country, a high-end country, Spain or somewhere, and then you're like, wow, they're so profound. But you just got to travel. Geography does play a major role.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I even think that's the whole geography piece and the cultural piece, and I love the travel piece that you bring up.
Yeah,
that's even bigger than race too, in the sense that you visit different parts of the, even just part of the country, right? Even if you're not traveling overseas, and right now, obviously, it's a challenge to travel right now. But if you go to, like, Charlotte or Nashville, you're getting a much different culture, whether from the neighborhoods, the restaurants, the people, than if you go out to the West Coast, San Diego, LA, Phoenix. And so you're getting a taste of what others are experiencing, what others are seeing in race, but also in just general socioeconomics and all that.
Yeah.
So I think the travel piece, and you're right though. People use that word sheltered. You're sheltered. You lived in the same small town your whole life, which is fine, but you've never really experienced anything else. And so therefore, when someone comes in that has a different the way dialect or the way they speak is different than what you perceive from TV, or you're going to be shocked. I find it fascinating and bizarre that somebody would look at you in a weird way and say, "Oh my God, you're so eloquent."
Yeah. No, I've had
that's bizarre.
Not to cut you off. I've had specific places I've been to. They would treat me differently because I would walk in, hey, excuse me, you guys got a bathroom I can use, and then they start looking, and I'll go up to pay for something. We're stopping to get gas, and they go, "You're not from around here,"
right?
And then completely treat you differently and put you in a box because you're not from there. So they'll put you in a box saying, "Oh, you're a better one," and not the ones that I see on the regular local. And they don't even have to say it. It's just because of how they treat you. And I travel so much that I could see the difference whenever I go places.
When you say a better one, you're saying a better black person?
A better black guy. Yeah.
That's what I figured. Yeah. I just want to clarify. Let me ask you this question: there, just like any color or race or creed or whatnot, there are different people in different socioeconomic stages in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever faced, and it sounds like this sounds like an instance of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think racism is necessarily the right word,
mm-hmm.
but resentment from other African Americans who look at you and say, to your point, oh, he's not from here, he's a better one, he has a good job, he drives a nice car, and I'm resentful towards that. Have you faced that too, not just from Caucasians, but from other African Americans?
Yeah, and let me also make a quick statement. Like, by no means, because of those experiences that happened, do I think I'm better. Like whatever. I've come from, my parents are from Haiti, and I lived in New Jersey, so I've lived in condos, small bed. I've seen roaches. Like I don't come from anything with money. But it's interesting. It's a very interesting question. I've had two different experiences. I've had people excited that they finally meet a brother. Not finally, but I've had women in places I've traveled go, and it's so refreshing to see a young educated brother, and it stays at that. Or they'll keep coming back saying, man, they're so proud. And usually it comes from like the older folks, in the community, because they want to see not just them, that's everybody. Every culture wants to see their kinfolk do better, plain and simple. But that's experience one. It's like, man, I'm so proud. They're so proud. Like they'll tell you 100 times throughout the day.
Right.
But you do get some, and I'm not gonna lie. Like when I first moved to the DC area, I used to live in the Southeast. This didn't happen too much in New York because people mind their business up there. But I've moved in this, and I literally had this one dude say, "You think you better than us?" And I'll go, no. Like, is it because of how I'm speaking or what I'm doing or what's going on? That's what you're thinking. That's not what I believe. And it would shut him up, because I would respond. Sometimes people, and let me fix this. They get it twisted. They'll see a guy in a suit, see a guy well dressed, and it doesn't mean that, they don't have hood or ways to be able to communicate with you, so and so, quote unquote. It's just like when you look at the Wahlbergs, I don't know them personally, but it's just kind of like, oh, I'm gonna fuck them up. Excuse my French. No, you're not. You're not gonna do that. They're not like regular little punk dudes or whatever. I hate to put it in that category. It's the same thing. So that experience has happened there. And it's like, you think you better than us? And I was like, no, I don't. Because of the way that I speak or what I'm wearing and what's going on has no reference to that whatsoever. And you got to put people in their place when that happens.
That's really that's interesting. People are like, it's almost like they're projecting their own.
They do
their own views. Which is unfair. They're projecting that. You're not saying that.
I correct them all the time. I go, no, that's what you're thinking. That's what you just said. That's what you just thought. It's not what I'm thinking. That's not how I operate. Oh. Yeah, that's right. Oh.
Right. There's nothing to say to that. Exactly. There's nothing to say to that.
Nope.
As I said, there's a lot of pieces of our discussion last week that I was thinking about after we spoke. And you mentioned the whole part about driving and trying to maybe avoid certain areas because you're worried about getting pulled over. Yeah. And I do think that as people, I think we do take things for granted. I know that sounds cliche. Mm-hmm. It's like when you get sick or something like that, and people will take your health for granted. Well, I don't get up every day saying, "Oh, thank God I don't have this disease," right? You just you take it for granted. And another thing I don't do every day when I get in my car is, "Oh my God, I hope I don't get pulled over." But it sounds like maybe you've had the experience where you were automatically thinking that when you get in your car, there's a chance that you might get pulled over, and how are you going to react to that if you do get pulled over to avoid any sort of bad, volatile situation? Mm-hmm. And you talked about, I know you mentioned your son, and I know you have a family, and I'm wondering what you're teaching your kids these days, what you're telling your kids once they leave the friendly confines of your home, once they leave. I know you mentioned last time that you live in an affluent, African-American neighborhood. And so it's one thing when it's about us as parents, we can handle a lot, but when it comes to our kids, that's precious.
Yeah.
So what are you telling your kids about how to kind of handle society today?
Yeah.
How to handle people's comments, people's looks at them? How are you raising them in that kind of way?
Not so much my daughter, because she's still 11 and she's not driving, but my son, he's 22. I'm constantly, he calls it preaching, but constantly teaching him. It's unfortunate that I have to have that conversation, Brian. It's unfortunate, but you can't be blinded to the fact that there are things that occur, and there, you see it in social media. You see it. It's not social media. It's not made up. You see people get pulled over and it turns ugly, right? And then you see the comments on there that say, "We shouldn't have been doing this. Shouldn't be doing." Sometimes the person is just being regular, just driving to the store to get a soda pop.
Right.
So one of the main things that occurs in our conversation, and this was my son just started driving and totally was unaware that I do it, but I had been accustomed to doing this, Brian. When I used to leave Jersey and drive into the southern area on 95 on the New Jersey Turnpike, I consistently, you always see people get pulled over that look like me. So now as an adult, when I'm going through Jersey or the Turnpike or wherever I'm going, and I go past a cop, I'm always looking over my shoulder, always looking in the mirror. So one day, this was before my son got his license, like, why do you turn around every time you drive past a cop? And I was like, I was so accustomed to doing it growing up because you always got pulled over.
Right.
If you drove into Jersey, if you drove over into Bloomfield, Glen Ridge, and you left like the Oranges where it's predominantly black, you're getting pulled over. You're getting pulled over. And you're getting asked, what are you doing around here, or do you live around here? My dad bought a house in Bloomfield, which is kind of 50-50 black-white majority white area. And until they found out that the Napoleons lived in this brand new house on the corner, it was always like, you got pulled over. It's like, what are you doing around here? The questions always came. So nowadays in 2020, I'm not going to lie to you. I try not to let fear and worry take over me, but it worries me. And then I always pray on him and the car before he leaves. Every single time. Because it's apparent that at some point something may happen. It's to the point where I told him, if you get pulled over, these are the things you need to do. Keep your hands on the wheel. Do not do any movement until they ask, plain and simple. But it's so bad. This sounds crazy. We sent them to pretty decent schools. We sent them to a military. I would tell him, if you're driving anywhere, make sure you have on your college gear, your military wear, anything. So if a cop or someone stops you, it could be a possible conversation. Or they may not give you as hard of a time because they're going to put you in a category. He got pulled over. Well, he had a little minor fender bender. Cop was real nice. Pulled him out. I knew where he was. I checked the navigation. When I got there, everything was fine. And then we got in the car. We was talking. He was like, "Dad, you're so right." Like, when the cop pulled over, the first thing he said to me, he's like, "You're a Fort Union kid." He was like, good school. Okay, I'll be back. He's like, "Calm down. Everything's okay." But that was the first thing the cop said to him. You went to Fort Union Military Academy. Right. So you got to come from good stock. Same thing with the local police in the area. If you went to Bishop McNamara, which is a very good Catholic high school here, it was like, well, your parents got to be decent people. It's sad that you get put into that category, because what if we didn't go to McNamara? What if we went to other schools? Do we get put in this category and then we get treated differently? Yes. But those are the precautions that I take and I tell him to do. And sometimes, if anything happens, those are conversations that end up happening because he's wearing his college gear or school things or anything else. And I have to have these conversations with him all the time.
how does he receive that from you? Is he, teenagers can be,
Yeah,
stubborn and obstinate and all that. And,
yeah,
but you're giving him advice that, at some point maybe could save his life.
yeah.
Yeah. In a really bad situation. But how, as a young man, how is he receiving that? He's obviously having different life experiences than even you had.
Yep.
So how is he receiving those from you? Or is he receptive?
He's 22 now.
Okay.
So when we started having these conversations at 16, it was rough then because he didn't understand, and he really wasn't relating or kind of comprehending where they were coming from. And over time of what he's seen and things that that you do see social media or you've heard that have been personal connections with friends or family, they start to make sense. But there is a percentage of him that is very frustrated that he has to live that way. And I can understand when he gets frustrated, we have those conversations, or either because we're talking about the whole keep your hand on the wheel OX, and then he'll get mad and he'll just say, why the fuck do I have to do these things to stay alive? It's messed up that I have to do these things, Dad. And it's sad, Brian, I try to stay real tough. I'm not gonna cry, on a podcast whatsoever, but it is a difficult part of our life that has to occur. Like, we're getting ready to buy him a car. I'm nervous as hell, because he has to leave here and go to Virginia and come back. But the only thing that, I can do as a praying man is just pray and pray that he doesn't run into that aggravated, angry cop if he happens to be pulled over.
It's literally like going out is it's almost like you're starting negative and have to work your way into positive territory. Like you're automatically going out with almost the assumption that it could be that particular law enforcement angry, bad apple. There, as we said in the last show, there are plenty of amazing ones that would be there to protect your son and my son, no matter what they look like, or save their life. But it is scary. And again, I think we all take that for granted because that's not necessarily something that I have to really worry about.
Yeah.
And it's not something that you should have to worry about.
I'm happy you acknowledge that too. Yeah.
It's not. I have plenty of other things to worry about. My own kids. My God, they're just getting in the car with my kids. Boys, they can be a little reckless anyway. But I do acknowledge that, and it actually makes me sick to my stomach that I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about this too over the next. These are not things that I didn't necessarily know or haven't necessarily heard before, but I think talking to someone who I'm close with, who I know very well, like you, and I will just say, and I'm not just saying this, he's lucky to have you as a leader, as a father, to set a really great example for him. So kudos to you and what you're doing. I want to ask you, we're starting to wind down here, but I've incorporated
before you switch off the
question, go ahead.
I just want to make a point.
Because sometimes it gets lost in translation that people that make statements like me about what to do or what to occur, they just probably think law enforcement is the worst. Half of my friends are law enforcement officers. Like my fraternity brothers, there are 4 of them that I'm like this close to that I just saw last weekend are law enforcement officers. And there are some great law enforcement officers that are not just African American, they're of all descent. And it's just very unfortunate. And people have to realize this, that there are some bad apples. There are bad apples in what I do as a video journalist. You know what I'm saying? And it's just unfortunate. And I just want to make sure that your viewers and people know that, because it's sometimes you just got to say it. Like, it's not, it's some amazing people out there that are law enforcement. And it's just unfortunate that you run into the bad ones.
Well, I use the word a couple of things. That's a great point. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
There are 2 points I want to make to that also. I said stereotypes. I asked you about stereotypes before, right? Mm-hmm. About what some people have stereotypes about Black people. You can't stereotype an entire a sector or an entire group of people.
Yeah.
You can't do it because there are thousands. Yeah. Of every field, of every type of person, and it's so ignorant to say, well, they're all like that.
Right.
No, exactly. They're not all like that. Not all Black people are this. Not all law enforcement people are this. Not all Jewish people are. You can't say that about a group of
Yeah.
people.
It's ignorant. Yeah.
You will end up being a hypocrite if you do that.
Yeah.
I've always come, again, not to get political necessarily, but I've always said that when people have, I believe that life is really about balance.
Yeah.
You have to have balance in all parts of your life: work-life balance, family balance, financial balance, all that, right? We all have our little vices. We're gonna do a show on vices at some point. People like their drinks or whatever, right? They're gambling. Everything is about balance, right? So let's remember that we need to keep a certain balance on things. Not everything is always to the extreme, and that's why I always like. And I'm sure I've done this before. I'm sure I have. So I'm not sitting here saying I haven't. But when you have an extreme viewpoint on someone or something, an issue, be very careful how extreme you are, because if you're really far off into one side of that issue, there's a good chance at some point you're going to turn into a hypocrite, because it's impossible. I had this conversation about an animal rights person or something who's like so extreme. I don't eat this and you shouldn't either. And then what are those pants you're wearing? And again, I'm not saying they're all like, I'm just saying you better be careful what you're wearing or what you're doing, because at some point you will become a hypocrite.
Right.
And that's very dangerous. The other thing I wanted to say about what you said is, unfortunately, I believe that we are in a time right now where people oftentimes hear what they want to hear.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what you're saying. They're hearing what they want to hear. And this happens all the time. And that's why I want to just get to the media. That'll be our last topic here. But you could sit here and say, I've gotten pulled over by law enforcement before. I probably shouldn't have. It probably was because of the color of my skin. I'm teaching my son this. And then you're saying, but there are a lot of great cops out there, a lot of great law enforcement. We know that. But somebody will leave the conversation saying, oh, he hates all cops. He says they're all dirty, they're all corrupt. And that's not what we're saying. But people hear what they want to hear, and that drives me nuts.
Yeah, it does.
Listen. The best form of communication is often listening. I know it's hard to believe with the amount I talk. But listen to what people are saying, and don't always have the answer before they're done. Right. Otherwise, you will not necessarily hear what they have to say. So I'm actually glad that you made that point. I want to ask you about media.
Yep.
Because there's always everybody always talks about media being biased in some way. Is it racially insensitive? Is it politically biased? Right? We just went through this with the election here, right? And I'm wondering, in your opinion, as a black man, do you feel like media is fair in its coverage of African Americans, of society, or are there too much footage of people at protests looting businesses? Is there too much, crime stories that have the face of Black people, Latinos, and not as much of the Caucasians? I mean, I don't know. I only see what I see. I can only observe my personal opinions, but I'm wondering what you think about that. The media. What role does the media play in people's viewpoints?
Well, it's kind of biased. I work in media. I work as a video journalist in different capacities. All different outlets are different. You got your independents and you have your mainstream. I think that media plays a role when needed in certain different ways. And there's several different categories to this answer. Like, it's so weird. Like last night I was watching, excuse me. I was watching the news 2 days ago during the election, and they were down at Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC. So nothing was going on. Everyone was being peaceful. They were waiting for the election. But to me, it seemed like because nothing was going on, the news kept playing, 2 people got arrested. And then they kept showing the same clip. I never really understood that. It's like, why you got to keep showing the same clip or incite that, hey, something's potentially going to happen or something's going on, right? That's kind of besides the point, because sometimes they just need something to report. What I don't like is that, and I notice this very clear as day, and I see it all the time and I hear it all the time. And I don't know what level it's coming from with the media, but when something happens to an African American in any capacity, it could be good, bad, or whatever, they read their profile of all the worst shit they did,
or they find like a something instead of highlighting what's really occurring. So like if something happened, like when the whole Trayvon Martin case came, it was just like, they found a piece of weed on him. I was like, what? Why was that even mentioned? The kid was just going to the store. That's like a whole nother category of conversation. But what I'm trying to say is that what I notice, and it really occurs, is that it's always all the negative shit that comes up, right? And then they that gets portrayed first instead of saying that person just might be a human, like just a human being. Something good or bad may have occurred. In contrast to that, there, and I have to say this, there was a young lady that was dating someone in the football league, and she ended up sleeping with several football players. And of course, they're not together anymore. So I'm like reading the whole article, kind of reading the whole article. And it mentioned it like in a small little paragraph, and then the rest of the paragraph was like how amazing she was. And I was like, wow. So I'm like looking at this article, looking at this other article, and I was like, if it was flipped on the other side, it would have been like, she's a whore. You know what I mean? Like, and it would have been like, she's a whore all the way to the bottom. But it happens, Brian. It does. And sometimes I just don't know what media thinks about when they do that. Like, where does it come from? Because it's come from the top, the bottom. Is it just the editor, the reporter? Like, where does it come from, and why does it have to be that way? So they play an interesting role. It's like this pick and choose, you know, what we'll say and how we'll say, but they do pick and choose based on who you are. It happens. Like, I see it because I study the media more because this is what I do. And I was like, and sometimes you just go, hey, why the hell did they say that?
Do you think it's intentional? In other words, are the executives sitting in the office and are they saying this is how our coverage is going to be, or is it just an underlying the way people are thinking in that particular?
That's a deep question, Brian, and that's a whole nother series because society is so used to categorizing people and so used to having people in this way, they do it unconsciously. Most of the time, I don't even think they even know that they said it or did it.
That's what I mean. Exactly.
Yeah. And it has become a norm. And when they're reporting or certain things, it's kind of like, okay, well, he's this person, so this, they just report it that way. People have been brainwashed for centuries. So that's like I said, that's like a whole nother show of, we'll start diving into systematic oppression where people don't even think exists, and how it builds on all these different levels, and then how things are reported. I'll give you a crazy example. Crazy. Growing up, I thought, and you probably thought this too, when they would talk about voodoo, they would say, oh my God, it's the worst thing ever. It's black magic, little dolls. People die, like all this shit, right? Am I right or wrong? Portrayed in Hollywood, everything. It was just like, go to the islands. This is what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, what are those where you like to prick the person, then somebody else feels it? What's that?
Brian, it's not true.
Yeah, I don't know.
Good and bad. So I'm Haitian, and I grew up. And as I grew up, my parents started educating us in the culture of voodoo. And the culture of voodoo was a religion. This is a whole nother topic of discussion too. And when I started understanding the essence and the beauty that on certain holidays, how my grandma, they would wear all white in the village, and they would go up this mountain, and then they would praise the ancestors, and all these things would occur. And it was just so beautiful. I was like, they never told me about this beautiful side.
Right.
And they're never going to tell me, and it didn't occur. So it's what they portray. It's what the media and television, it's what's being portrayed, and they sell it. So a whole nother conversation. For me to even have the conversation, people go, what do you mean? Of course, you stick it with the end of the thing, and they go, oh, they're the boogie. But it's how they've been trained to portray and what to show. It's true, man.
And it's right. It gets to the point where it's like, where do I go for information? I mean, and even now, whether you're watching on TV or on on mobile or whatnot,
right?
The media is the media. That's where we're getting our information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that it might very well be biased, well, it is. We know it is biased in certain ways. That's where we get our information. And there are a lot of people that will take that particular story and they will say that's what it is. It's cut and dry and it is what it is. They won't necessarily go research to see if they should maybe dig a little bit deeper. But as I said before, even if you go research, who knows what you're researching?
You're right. Let me add to that too. So it's just been discussion about, you know, the previous candidates and people running for X, Y, and Z. And look what they did. Look what they did. So I'm talking to one of my boys, and then I let him go on his rant. And I go, but were you there? Were you there with that person?
Right.
Everything you just read, and someone said how terrible of whomever or whatever they've done. Were you there? No, I wasn't. But I was like, but what? You just read something. How do you know that's true? How do you even know? You're just listening to these people and you're just saying X, Y, and Z?
You mean,
now,
are you saying that things can be taken out of context, Don? Really? Does that actually happen?
I say this, you know, if you can have a conversation with that person and then that person tells you X, Y, and Z, people could lie, but they can have a conversation. Then you're like, I personally sat down with them. Then you can speak on it. But I'm like so far away from conspiracies. When my friends, family, people send me them stupid videos, I was like, I just look at them and go, really? Are you like seriously? You're gonna listen? Okay.
There's a lot of propaganda out there.
You can't.
You can't,
dude. You can't. Yeah.
You're listening to the Eye on Life podcast. We're here with Don Napoleon. So my last question, and I think we're almost up to an hour here, so I'm going to try to keep this brief. But where do we go from here, Don? Where do we kind of, in your view? And again, you're one person. I personally have tremendous respect. So even though you're just one person, your voice to me, it's loud. It's very loud. And I acknowledge, I know you, I respect you. I've known you for a long time. So that's one of the reasons why. But where do we kind of go from here? We're taping this during an election. By the time this show airs, the election will have already, hopefully the election will have been decided by then. And I know it's not just political, but as Asians and blacks and whites and religions and somebody likes this food or that food, they're all different levels of differences, right? Some are more important than others. But where do we go? When we have differences here, where do we kind of go from here so we can, not to sound Pollyanna, but where we can have a society where maybe, there's not as much divisiveness.
I have an excellent answer for that, and I'm happy you asked. Me and you aren't like this. But if there's someone out there that has misconceptions, differences, misunderstandings, or just any malice that you recognize that you may have against another person, another culture, or anything, if you do, and if you care to be human and want to open up your heart, have discussions with people. Plain and simple. If you care to have it. Some people are one-tracked, this is closed. No, it's what I know, and then that's it. But if you want things to be better, if you want your life and your environment, this country that we're in, to be a better place, you must be open to dialogue. You must be open to having discussions with other people that don't look like me or you, to understand and then figure out if you want to move forward. Because if we stay one-tracked, if we stay one direction, if we stay thinking one thing, then we'll never change.
I don't want to say too much more to that because that was more profound than anything I could say. The only thing that I will just say to what you just said, Don, is that if there are people out there who don't want to have those conversations, they're not willing to have those conversations, they've closed themselves off from the conversations, and they're going to think how they think regardless of the conversation. They're really missing out on an amazing, life-changing opportunity to not only educate themselves, but maybe to meet someone that is a really great person. And to be honest with you, anybody who doesn't want to have that conversation, I'm sad for them, and I pity them for not wanting to have that conversation because they are missing out. Can you imagine, and I'm just going to use this as an example before we wrap up. Can you imagine if the two of us had a preconceived notion of each other when we first met, and all we did was we did that taping together, and then that was it? you've enriched a lot of the things that I've done as part of my career, as part of my life. We've hung out many times, we've kept in touch. You have been you've enriched things. It's sad to think that if we had preconceived notions of what the other person was without ever getting to know the person, that we might have missed out on this. We wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
That's true. That's true.
That to me would be sad, and that to me would be tragic. So what you said was spot on. I don't even want to build on that, but I will just say that. Don, you've been awesome as usual. This was great. Thanks for taking the time on part 2. I'd love to have you on again. I do want to maybe dig a little bit deeper into some of the things, but I want you to be safe and be well, you and your family, in not just during COVID, but all days.
Yep.
And I really appreciate your perspective and am I allowed to say your eloquence? Because you are eloquent, but I'm not surprised by that. I know you enough that I'm not.
My parents. Thank my parents. Good education, good mind, and the good Lord upstairs. You
are a great friend and a great partner. I appreciate all that you do. I want to thank everyone for joining us again. Thank you to our new listeners in Indianapolis and up in Maine. Keep listening, and Don, as always, keep doing me a favor and keep an eye on each other and keep an eye on life. See you in the next show.
Thanks for having me, brother.